welcome back to my channel, Savings by the Cup. On today's video, we're going to be talking about 4 common budgeting mistakes that people make that cause them to either fail or give up on budgeting and what you can do to avoid them. I know that with it being a new year, most of us like to set our goals for the year. Sometimes they're health, career, or financial goals. However, as many of you know, despite our best intentions at the beginning of the year, a lot of us tend to fail or give up on these goals shortly after the year starts. When it comes to finances, sometimes we get to the end of the year and we realize that we ended up either at the same place that we started at the beginning of the year, or that we ended up in even a worse spot than before. So I'm going to go ahead and be sharing some of these mistakes and how you can avoid them today. Just to kind of provide a little bit of context for you guys, even though my savings have fluctuated a lot over the years, by the time I was 22, I was already able to have about $15,000 saved, which I know that for some people that may not be a lot, but for me personally, that was quite a bit, especially because I didn't really have a lot of education when it came to finances. And by the time I was 23, I had over $25,000, and now that I'm older, now that I am 27 years old, I have even more. So obviously a lot of these tips that I'm going to share, they've personally helped me be able to stay on track, and so I'm hoping that they'll be able to do the same with you. Alright, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, like in my previous videos, I'm going to be writing out the 4 mistakes on my journal. So we'll go ahead and call this 4 financial mistakes to avoid. And then we'll go ahead and list them one by one. So our very first financial mistake that we are going to be talking about today that stops a lot of people from reaching their financial goals is setting unrealistic expectations or having too strict of a budget. So let's go ahead and put that as our very first mistake that we want to avoid this year in 2026, setting unrealistic expectations or being too strict. What do I mean by this? At the beginning of the year, a lot of us may feel super optimistic about how we want our budget to run. But let's be real with each other. We all know that life doesn't always run the way that we expect it to be. Now, just to clarify, I don't mean that we don't have to make any sacrifices if we want to reach our financial goals. So hear me out. What I mean in my personal philosophy is that I don't like to deprive myself completely of things that I know I am going to want or that I will do when I'm going through my financial journey. If you do this, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to give up. So under here, we're going to put, do not deprive yourself. Now again, I'm not saying don't make sacrifices, because it is going to be important. For example, let's say that maybe you are used to going to Starbucks every single day of the week that you work. So let's say it's 5 days a week. You may have to make the decision to be like, you know what, instead of going 5 days a week this week to Starbucks, maybe I'm gonna limit it down to 2 or 1 day a week. I'm gonna save it for when I really need it. But what I'm saying, guys, is don't make it seem like you're never going to go to Starbucks again in the next year, because we both know that that's not going to happen most likely. The truth is, if you can't keep up with the lifestyle, then don't do it. So I'm going to put it on here. If you can't keep up with the lifestyle, don't do it. This is, I feel like, the number one reason why a lot of people give up on budgeting, because if you're unrealistic, you just don't want to do it anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a real life example in my personal finances. Right now, my husband and I are primarily living off of my income. When I created our budget, we had a little bit of money left over, not a lot. It's about, I don't know, I'd say maybe at the moment we're at about maybe $100 every 2 weeks that we can spend. However, Could I have maybe continued to budget the rest of that money out and leave us no spending money? Yes. But would that be realistic? No. I know that sometimes, for example, right now that my husband is in school, he has to work a full night shift and then he still has to come into work the following day. So maybe there's going to be some days where he needs a little bit of extra caffeine, maybe he needs another coffee, maybe he needs an energy drink. So me acting like that's not going to happen isn't going to help me reach my financial goals, because now I'm going to be behind on my budget. The other thing is sometimes we have bad days, you know, maybe I need a coffee one day. I'm just having a rough day, a rough morning, and I want to treat myself to one. Or maybe I want to go shopping for something that I might need. So rather than acting like these things are just not going to come up, I like to budget them into my budget, because if I feel like I'm getting a little bit of what I like, it makes it easier for me to keep up with my goals. I would say the same thing applies to travel and fun. Y'all maybe have seen one of my recent videos where I went to Disneyland. Obviously, I could have used that money to pay off debt, of course. However, my husband had a small break from school, and we just wanted to do something fun to get us out of our routine from the last few months. Now, obviously, here the key is we did pay for this with our savings money. We saved for it instead of putting it on debt. So whenever you do, just make sure that you cash flow it instead. Don't put it on debt, because if you put yourself into debt to treat yourself, or with some of these things, then at that point you are setting yourself behind. So here I'm gonna go ahead and note down cash flow, fun, or other small expenses to treat yourself. So this right here is our first financial mistake and how you can avoid it. The next financial mistake that I see quite often when people are creating their budgets is to forget, or them forgetting about their irregular expenses. What are these? Regular expenses would be anything that you don't normally budget for on a monthly basis. For example, your car registration needing to be renewed, having to pay for taxes, having to buy a gift for somebody, or having to renew things like your license and passport. Those things I wouldn't say are part of our normal monthly budget, but it is important that we budget for them, because at some point during the year they might come up, especially things like registration, and usually those bills can tend to be a bit heftier, so we definitely want to prepare for them. If you don't budget for these things, you're going to end up feeling like you're falling behind on your goals. So how can we combat this? Well, the biggest suggestion that I have is to try to anticipate as many of these expenses as possible. So let's go ahead and write that here. Anticipate these expenses as much as possible. So for example, let's say that your car registration is due every September. Since you know that that bill is going to come up months in advance, I would recommend that you start setting some money aside in your budget so that when that bill comes, you can go ahead and actually budget for it. You'll have the money ready to go, However, I do know that sometimes some expenses can come up unexpectedly. For example, car repair. Or there's some bills that maybe even if you try to anticipate as many of your expenses as possible, you're just going to forget that they're there until you see them in the mail or you see the money pulled out of your account. So if that's the case, what I would do if I were you is start keeping track this year. If you get any unexpected bills that you didn't really remember to anticipate, start tracking them. So we'll put here track random regular bills. So again, if you're unfamiliar with when your registration comes in, once it comes in this year, track it so that way next year you know, hey, this month is when this bill is going to come in, so that you can start preparing ahead of time. Now, I know that sometimes there's going to be unexpected bills like a car repair that you truthfully just didn't know was going to happen. You can't track it because it's not an annual bill that comes up all the time. So what can you do in this scenario? What I like to do, and I'll show you a little snippet of it here on camera, is that I like to have a little section in my budget tracker called outstanding bills. So set up an outstanding bill tracker. So you could see in the photo what mine looks like. What I usually do, for example, this month my husband's registration came in the mail. What I did, since I wasn't really anticipating, I know when my registration comes in, but I don't know when his does. What I did is I just put the bill on there, the date that it's due, and the amount. Now it's not due until March, and we received it in January. So that allows me 2 months to be able to save up for that bill and make sure that it's paid on time. So what I do now is when I have extra money, before just throwing all of it into our debt pile, I will instead pay that bill first because it's an outstanding bill, and then I'll go ahead and use the rest towards debt or towards our savings. Last but not least, I know this is something that gets commonly recommended, is you can always just have kind of like an emergency fund specifically for unexpected expenses. So an emergency fund, maybe you can either set up a sinking fund if you're the type of person that likes to use cash, or you can have certain money set aside in your savings account that you know is going to be only for those irregular expenses. And if you pull the money out, just make sure that you replenish it. That way next time you have an unexpected expense, you're ready to go. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about financial mistake number 3, which is overcomplicating things. I know that a lot of us maybe don't have a huge background when it comes to finances or when it comes to budgeting. And sometimes it can be a little intimidating when you go online and you see very elaborate budgeting spreadsheets. And my personal recommendation is just keep things as simple as possible. There are only 3 basic things that you need to know. The first one is how much money, hold on, let me label this, things to know. The first one is how much is coming in, how much is going out, and the third one, when is everything coming out. Here's a basic example of something similar that I use, although I tend to use electronic version just because it's easier than having to handwrite, since some of these things may change, or I have to maybe delete a bill or add an extra bill. But if you get a planner like this is the one that I have linked in my Etsy page down below. You can just go ahead and basically gather what are my total monthly bills, what date are they coming out, and what is my income for the month. And honestly, guys, you don't even need to buy a fancy planner. You don't even need to use even my stuff that I have on my Etsy page. You could literally just grab a notebook like this and make a list of your bills and make a list of how much money you have coming in. Just being able to see both of those things against each other will allow you to be able to determine if there are certain areas where you might need to cut back. There's no need to have certain percentages of what you're spending where or this and that. Just keep it very simple, make a very basic budget. Now, the third thing you'll notice that I did right on here is when everything is coming out. The reason that you want to know this is because, for example, I'm gonna go ahead and use my rent as an example. My rent is always due on the 1st of the month. Sometimes my first paycheck doesn't come in until the 4th. Sometimes it doesn't come in until the 9th. If I had calculated for rent to come out of that very first paycheck, that would make it pretty stressful when the first week of the month came up, because I probably wouldn't have the money available to pay my rent. However, instead of budgeting for it on that first paycheck, I decided to budget for it on the last paycheck of the month. As you'll notice in my little planner that I mentioned, I like to budget it towards the end, because this allows me to be able to pull the money out of my second check. That way when the 1st of the month comes up, I already have my expenses taken care of. If you guys would like for me to explain this concept a little better, I can do another video where I kind of explain it. Obviously, there's a lot of budgeters out there that are able to have a whole month's worth of expenses in their checking account, and that helps them not have to worry as much about when the money is coming out of their account. But for me personally, since we don't necessarily have that in our debit account, I like to know when it's coming out and I like to prepare for that. All right, so now for our final mistake that we want to avoid is not knowing how to create a budget. One of the biggest things that I see often with a lot of people that I know is that because we've never had anybody to teach us how to create a budget, getting started can be hard. But I just wanted to mention this on here because if you're that person that has never had anybody, a role model in your family, teach you how to handle money or any of that stuff, don't let that be the reason why you can't reach your financial goals. Instead of that, I would recommend using the resources that you have available. I know there's a ton of books that you can read. For me, one of the biggest things that has really helped me is just educating myself through videos on YouTube or through watching financial channels that teach you how to budget, that teach you about things like 401k, all that stuff. There's plenty of free resources that you can take advantage. So we're gonna go ahead and put that as a way for us to combat this, is educate yourself using free resources. And honestly, guys, it's as simple as finding a creator that you feel like budgets in a way that makes sense to you. It doesn't even have to be my channel. Like I mentioned, I like to budget a little bit more on the loose end, in the sense that I like to budget for fun things. I don't like to be super strict on my budget. But if you're the type of person that likes to be strict, that wants to be super disciplined, find a channel that budgets the way that you would like to budget and start to copy some of the tactics that they use. And just remember, just keep it simple and be reasonable when you're creating your budget. All right, well, that wraps up today's video. These are 4 common mistakes that cause people to fail when they budget, and what you can do to avoid those mistakes in 2026 so that hopefully you can go ahead and stick to your financial goals. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos like this, please follow and subscribe. That way you can go ahead and continue to see more content like this, and so that you can also see my financial journey through the year. But anyways, guys, other than that, I look forward to seeing you in my next video. I hope you guys have an amazing day. Bye.